Could a single seat taken away be enough to bring down an entire airline overnight? The sound of high heels clicked softly against the thick carpet, blending with the murmurs of first-class passengers, creating the usual luxurious atmosphere of an international flight. Aurora Hayes, a black billionaire, sat quietly in seat 3A by the window. Her elegant beige blazer hugged her shoulders perfectly. Her hair was tied neatly in a high bun, and large sunglasses covered half her face. But they could not hide the confident aura of a woman who had built a multi-billion-dollar financial empire. Aurora disliked attracting attention. She was here as an ordinary passenger, simply wishing for some peace before an important meeting in New York. But fate would not allow her that tranquility. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but this seat has been reassigned. We kindly ask you to move to economy class." The voice was loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. It was Bradley Moore, the customer service supervisor. His half-smile and cold eyes showed no sign of hesitation, as if he wanted the entire cabin to watch. Aurora tilted her head slightly, removed her sunglasses, her deep gaze fixed on Bradley, calm yet full of authority. "You must be mistaken. This is a business class ticket, booked under a premium priority package," Aurora said, her voice warm but firm. Bradley didn't bother to look at the ticket Aurora was holding out. Instead, he stepped aside to make room for the man standing next to him. A middle-aged white gentleman, his gold-plated watch glinting, confidently sat down in Aurora's seat, as if it had always been his. He gave Bradley a polite nod, then leisurely opened the menu and ordered a glass of wine, completely ignoring Aurora's presence. Around the cabin, curious glances followed them. Some whispered, "Did she just get kicked out of her seat? It must be a mistake, but why don't they check her ticket?" An elderly woman in the row ahead pulled out her phone, opened the camera, and began recording. A young boy sitting behind glanced at his mother and whispered, "Mom, why are they doing that to her?" The mother didn't answer, only turned her face away in silence. Aurora rose to her feet, every movement radiating an uncanny composure. Without a single argument, without a word of protest, she picked up her handbag, adjusted her blazer, and stepped into the aisle. But in that moment, some sensed something unusual. Perhaps it was the faint smile Aurora gave Bradley. Perhaps it was the way her gaze swept over him, cold but controlled, like someone holding the entire chessboard, patiently waiting for the final move. A young girl sitting in the back row quickly started a live stream on her phone, the words flashing on the screen. "Black CEO kicked out of business class right before our eyes, and she hasn't said a single word." Aurora gently placed her handbag under seat 21C in economy class, her movements unnervingly calm, as if everything had been planned in advance. Around her, eyes still followed. Some people secretly recorded videos, others whispered their judgments. But Aurora paid no attention. She sat upright, removed her leather gloves, and pulled out an old phone with a slightly scratched screen, nothing like what a billionaire woman would normally carry. She opened her contacts and pressed just one key, the letter B. When a voice answered on the other end, Aurora spoke softly, her tone low and decisive. "Activate red copyright protocol. I will be about 40 minutes late." Just one short sentence. Then she ended the call, put the phone back in her bag, her gaze steady and unreadable. In the row ahead, a young woman named Lena Brooks, her brown hair hastily tied, a laptop resting on her lap, happened to catch the name on the screen when Aurora made the call. "Red copyright protocol," she repeated to herself, her brows knitting slightly. Lena was a finance student, and she had a habit of hunting for information about powerful people. In that moment, an unusual intuition rose within her. She quickly opened her browser on her phone, whispering to the friend beside her, "She's not an ordinary person. I'm sure I've seen her face on Forbes." Next to Lena, a young man glanced around, then quickly turned on a live stream, titling the video, "What's happening here?" A black woman downgraded from her seat for a white man. The number of viewers jumped rapidly. Comments flooded in. "Someone verify who she is. She looks familiar. Is she a CEO? Oh God, this airline is done for." Aurora remained still, her hands clasped together, her eyes gently closed as if meditating, her calmness so profound it unsettled those around her. But anyone observant could sense that every breath she took seemed measured with precision. Every gesture radiated the aura of someone who never accepts defeat. No arguments, no noise, but like a storm silently gathering strength. And that silence from Aurora was more terrifying than any shout could ever be. Within minutes, the live stream had surpassed 10,000 viewers, and one question kept repeating on the screen. "Who is she?" A question that seemed simple, but the answer that was about to come would leave everyone stunned. Lena Brooks could no longer bear the curiosity for another second. Her fingers moved swiftly across her phone screen, typing frantic keywords. "Black woman, CEO, linen suit, Atlanta flight." Within seconds, results appeared, and Aurora Hayes' face filled countless business news articles. A bold headline from a well-known outlet made Lena freeze in shock. Aurora Hayes, the billionaire behind Hayes and Crenshaw Investment Fund, the primary sponsor of several major airlines. Lena's mouth fell open as she turned to her friend, whispering almost like a shout. "Oh my God, that's Aurora Hayes. She funds this airline." The information spread like a spark thrown into dry straw. In the cabin, a businessman in row 5, upon hearing Aurora's name, secretly checked his phone. After only a few taps, he confirmed it instantly, his face turning pale. Leaning close to his companion, his voice trembled. "She's the biggest financial partner this airline has." Whispers began to ripple through the cabin, passengers turning to one another, their once curious looks now replaced by uneasy and worried glances. In the back, the live stream exploded. Viewers flooded the comments. "I can't believe they did this to her. This airline is finished. I'm recording and saving everything." The number of viewers skyrocketed to 20,000, then 30,000 in just minutes. Meanwhile, in the business class section, murmurs grew louder. Bradley Moore, the man who had so confidently demanded Aurora give up her seat, still had no idea. He remained smug, checking the passenger list, believing he had handled a minor incident perfectly. But in a corner, an older flight attendant whispered to a colleague, her face pale. I recognize her. I saw her at last year's partner conference. We are in serious trouble." The younger attendant swallowed hard, sneaking a glance at Aurora sitting in row 21, and whispered back, "Bradley doesn't know yet, but when he does, it'll be too late." Aurora stayed perfectly composed, eyes closed, saying nothing, as if the chaos unfolding around her had nothing to do with her. But that very silence tightened the atmosphere like a stretched wire. Every gesture of hers, the way her hands folded gracefully, the subtle upward curl of her lips, radiated absolute control. And those observant enough understood this was not the silence of someone humiliated. This was the silence of someone waiting for the right moment to strike back. Outside, on social media, a hashtag began to surge. #Aurora Hayes. And this was only the beginning of the storm about to sweep through the entire airline. The cabin was unusually quiet, no longer filled with the casual murmurs from earlier, but instead heavy with tension reflected in every glance. In the business class section, Bradley Moore was still busy exchanging polite laughter with passengers, completely unaware of the growing stares directed at him. But in row 21, Aurora Hayes opened her eyes, her deep pupils glinting with the cold sharpness of someone used to commanding billion-dollar deals. She calmly opened her bag and pulled out an old leather notebook with worn edges, revealing neat, precise handwriting inside. Detailed notes that looked like a plan carefully prepared long ago. Aurora picked up her phone, and this time her voice was no longer soft, but sharp and commanding like an order. "Terminate all regular financial support for the airline. Activate the contingency clause in the contract. Begin immediately." Just seconds later, a voice on the other end responded, trembling yet efficient. "Understood. The order will be executed immediately." Aurora didn't reply, only gave a slight nod before hanging up, her eyes fixed forward like a general on the battlefield. In the business class section, an older flight attendant sitting near the aisle jolted as her tablet vibrated repeatedly. The screen flashed with a bright red warning. "Red alert. Tier 0 account holder. Do not interfere." She immediately turned to a younger colleague, her voice lowered but laced with fear. "Bradley is playing with fire. She's the one holding the funding contract for the new fleet. If we lose that, this airline will nosedive." At the same time, a young businessman in row 4, who had been silently observing everything, took out his phone and began recording. Whispering as he filmed, he said, "This is Bradley Moore, the service supervisor, the man who forced a primary investor billionaire to give up her seat. Ooh, look at this. He's still chatting like nothing happened." The video was uploaded to social media with the caption, "You won't believe it, but this is how they treat the very person paying for these seats." Within minutes, views skyrocketed, and the comments flooded in. "Unacceptable. She's going to teach them a lesson they'll never forget. I bet their stock will crash by tomorrow morning." Aurora closed the notebook, carefully placing it back into her bag, her demeanor still perfectly composed. But to those perceptive enough, that composure was far more terrifying than any outburst. No one saw her as a humiliated, powerless woman anymore. This was clearly a strategist about to launch a counterattack that would make an entire system tremble. And at that very moment, for the first time, Bradley looked up, meeting the strange glances of his colleagues. He frowned in annoyance, still not understanding why the atmosphere had shifted so quickly. But for Aurora, everything was only just beginning, and this flight would not land as peacefully as he thought. The plane's wheels touched the runway with a soft screech, but instead of the usual polite applause after landing, the air inside the cabin felt dense, like a storm waiting to break. Aurora Hayes sat still in 21C, her hands neatly resting on her handbag, her cold gaze as if she were watching an entire chessboard where she alone controlled the final move. She leaned slightly and pressed a button on her phone screen, her voice steady, stripped of any unnecessary emotion. Clear the entire jet bridge area. I will not leave the plane until they are present. In business class, Bradley Moore began to sense something was wrong. A young flight attendant approached, whispering nervously into his ear. "Bradley, the system just flagged Tier 0. I think you've crossed someone we should never cross." Bradley frowned, dismissing it. "She's just a difficult passenger. Don't exaggerate." But at that very moment, his tablet vibrated violently, and a bright red warning flashed across the screen. "Emergency alert. High-level financial partner on board. All passengers are to remain seated until further notice from the board." At the front of the cabin, passengers began whispering louder. Ethan Cole, the man who had brazenly taken Aurora's seat, suddenly realized the looks directed at him were no longer curious, but filled with discreet outrage. A woman whispered to her husband, "That's him, the one who took her seat." Dozens of phones were raised, screens glowing like sparks, signaling an imminent media explosion. Outside the plane, chaos unfolded at JFK Airport. 3 sleek black cars had parked directly by the jet bridge, accompanied by a sharply dressed team. Among them stood Miranda Lee, the airline's director of partnerships, clutching her phone. Her face tense as if awaiting a court verdict. Beside her, Connor Grant, the legal advisor, nervously flipped through documents, sweat beading at his temples. Aurora glanced at her watch, the corner of her lips curling into a barely noticeable smile. The livestream in the back had surpassed 50,000 viewers, comments flashing rapidly. "She's so calm. This will be the airline's biggest collapse of the year. Just wait, the storm is coming." Bradley Moore, meanwhile, struggled to maintain his composure, though his hands had begun to tremble slightly. Another young flight attendant approached, her voice shaking. "Bradley, they said no one is allowed to leave the plane until further notice, and they requested immediate arrangements for Aurora Hayes at the jet bridge." At that moment, Bradley finally understood. Everything had spun completely out of his control. And Aurora? She simply sat there, her back straight, silent, like a queen patiently waiting for her subjects to kneel at her feet. The airplane door opened with a sharp click, but no passenger was allowed to stand. The entire cabin was silent, the only sound being the steady footsteps echoing from the jet bridge. Miranda Lee and Connor Grant appeared, their faces set like they were walking into a courtroom rather than greeting a passenger. Aurora Hayes rose slowly, adjusting the lapel of her beige blazer, every movement so precise and deliberate that no one could take their eyes off her. She walked forward, step by step, not rushing, yet her presence rippled through the cabin like a rising tide of authority. Bradley Moore tried to step forward to explain, but Aurora simply raised her hand, a subtle gesture sharper than any words. "Not now. You will hear the verdict later," she said quietly, her voice low yet resonant enough for those nearby to hear. Bradley froze, sweat forming at his temples, his face gradually paling. Aurora strode past the business class section, leaving stunned gazes in her wake. Miranda and Connor lowered their heads respectfully, a bow not meant for a passenger, but for someone who held their future in her hands. As she exited the plane, Aurora said nothing, stepping into the waiting black car, leaving behind an atmosphere stretched tight as a drawn bowstring. Just 3 hours later, at the airline's New York headquarters, the executive board room lights were on. Aurora entered in a simple yet elegant black dress, placing a small USB drive on the long oak conference table. "This is the internal recording from Flight 772. Let's watch how you treat your largest financial partner," she said, her voice steady and cold. On the large screen, every detail replayed with brutal clarity. Bradley ignoring her ticket, giving her seat to Ethan Cole, and his dismissive smirk as he treated her with disdain. No one in the room dared meet her gaze. Connor Grant lowered his head, his voice hoarse. We apologize, Mrs. Hayes. This was a serious mistake." Aurora glanced at him, a look that silenced the entire room. "A mistake," she repeated, her tone sharp with emphasis. "You signed a contract under Clause 9B with my fund. That clause allows me to initiate immediate restructuring in the event of public discriminatory conduct that harms a partner's reputation, and I am activating it." One board member swallowed hard, staring at his phone as the airline's stock price plummeted without stopping. Aurora stood, slipping the USB back into her bag. "Starting tonight, I will personally oversee every change. If you disagree, you are free to find another source of funding. But I doubt anyone would risk investing in an airline that has just been shamed worldwide." She walked out, leaving behind a room frozen in silence, where those who once believed they held power now could do nothing but look at each other in despair. That evening, at the airline's headquarters, an emergency meeting was convened with only a handful of people. Aurora Hayes sat at the head of the table, her hand resting lightly on an old leather notebook, her face calm and cold. Across from her, Bradley Moore stood rigid, like a criminal awaiting judgment. Miranda Lee and Connor Grant sat silently, avoiding Aurora's gaze, because they knew there was no turning back now. Aurora slowly flipped open the notebook, her eyes scanning the densely written notes before looking up at Bradley. "You're familiar with Clause 12F in the company's employment contract, aren't you?" Bradley pressed his lips together, saying nothing, but Aurora continued, her voice low but sharp as a blade. "Dereliction of duty. Gross negligence resulting in reputational damage to the brand. I am enforcing that clause now." She closed the notebook, her hand pressing firmly against its leather cover. "Effective immediately, you are officially terminated. Your employee badge will be deactivated at once, and you have 10 minutes to leave the building." Bradley's face turned pale, his eyes darting as if searching for a way out, but no one in the room dared to speak up for him. A soft ting sounded as Miranda glanced down at her tablet and gave a small nod. "His badge has been deactivated, Mrs. Hayes." Bradley exhaled shakily, his shoulders slumping as though he had just received a death sentence. He took a hesitant step forward, trying to say something, but Aurora raised her hand slightly, signaling him to stop. "Don't waste your time apologizing to me. Apologize to the millions of customers watching the video of you mocking me that's spreading across social media." Her voice was cold, calm, and it was that very composure that made Bradley feel like he was being suffocated. Another flight attendant, who had also appeared in the viral video, received his decision immediately, as Miranda spoke without hesitation. "You and every crew member involved in this incident will have your contracts terminated within 24 hours. Check your email. The details have been sent." Aurora stood, her movements decisive, ending the meeting with one final statement that left everyone frozen in silence. "From now on, this is not just a termination. This is a lesson for anyone who thinks power can be abused to humiliate others." Minutes later, an internal announcement was issued, spreading like wildfire. "Bradley Moore and the entire crew of Flight 772 have been immediately terminated." Outside, news outlets began running headlines, while on social media, the hashtag @Aurora Hayes officially claimed the #1 spot worldwide. Aurora left the boardroom without looking back, walking away in the absolute silence of those who once sat at the pinnacle of power, but now could only bow their heads as she passed. And for her, this was only the first step in a much larger reform. The next morning, less than 12 hours after the termination announcement was released, global social media had erupted. Major news outlets simultaneously ran headlines. "Aurora Hayes, the woman who changed the standards of the aviation industry in just one night." The hashtag @Aurora Standard shot straight to the #1 trending spot worldwide, accompanied by short video clips capturing the moment Aurora left the plane. Calm, yet commanding. One comment from a live stream went viral, shared everywhere. She didn't need to raise her voice. She just walked away, and the whole world went silent to listen. On forums, thousands of women of color shared their own stories. A retired professor in Atlanta posted a video. "Last year, they pushed me out of my first-class seat, claiming it was a mistake. But now I know I wasn't wrong. They were." A female entrepreneur in Detroit wrote, 30 years of flying around the world, and I was still treated like an outsider. Aurora stood up for all of us." This rising wave needed no slogans, no banners, only simple, honest testimonies. Other airlines immediately felt the pressure. One major competitor issued a statement overnight. "We are officially implementing a new service standard based on the Aurora Standard model." The media called it a chain reaction, as within 24 hours, 3 European regional airlines also announced they were reviewing their service protocols. At Heritage Airlines headquarters, the PR department was in chaos. Emails from customers flooded in. "We want to be treated under the Aurora Standard." One frequent passenger even wrote bluntly, "I'm willing to pay double as long as you learn to serve the way Aurora demands." Aurora, meanwhile, remained silent in the media. She declined all interview requests, sending only a short email to the entire airline staff. "This is not revenge. This is a reminder. Every customer, no matter who they are, deserves absolute respect." Experts called it the Aurora effect, a shockwave that required no threats, only presence. And while the world was still talking, Aurora was already preparing for the next step, to redefine the entire way the aviation industry operates. A year after the event that shook the entire aviation industry, the name Aurora Hayes was no longer just associated with billions of dollars or massive investment deals. It had become a symbol. At the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., a new exhibit had been unveiled, with no bright lights and no grand banners, just an old airplane seat with a small plaque that read, 21C, the seat that changed history. The 21C seat sat in a quiet space, next to a touchscreen, displaying the now famous video of Aurora sitting calmly amidst a media storm. her composed gaze as if everything had been planned from the very beginning. Below the plaque, the museum's inscription moved many to tears. This seat belonged to no one until a woman decided to sit down and refused to give up her place to injustice. A group of schoolchildren passed by, most only glancing briefly before moving on. But a young black girl, no older than 10, stopped. She read every word carefully, her bright eyes filled with wonder. "Mom," she asked softly, curiosity lacing her small voice. "Can I be like her?" Her mother, wearing a simple shirt, leaned down with a warm smile, gently squeezing her daughter's shoulder. "You don't need to be her, but you can do what she did. Sit down and never give up your place to injustice." Those who witnessed the moment fell silent, and someone whispered, "Aurora did more than reclaim a seat. She gave people a reason to believe we can change things." Outside the museum, a small shop selling T-shirts printed with the words, "21C, we belong here," sold out entirely on its opening morning. On social media, young people began sharing a new hashtag, #WeBelongHere, treating it as a statement of their right to be respected anywhere. And Aurora. She did not attend the opening ceremony, nor did she make any public statements. True to her nature, she let everything speak for itself, because a real legacy is not in promises, but in changes that can touch people's hearts. Late in the afternoon, at a small cafe on a quiet corner of New York, Aurora Hayes sat alone by the window, gently stirring a steaming cup of Earl Grey tea. She wore a simple light grey sweater with no bodyguards, no camera flashes, and no respectful greetings like in corporate meetings. Outside the glass window, the city remained noisy, cars rushed by. But here, Aurora was strikingly calm, as if she had never been the woman who forced the entire aviation industry to change in just one night. A young woman walked into the cafe, her gaze pausing as she recognized Aurora. She hesitated for a moment before stepping closer, her voice soft and slightly nervous. "Excuse me. You're Aurora Hayes, aren't you? You're the one who refused to give up that seat?" Aurora looked up, her deep eyes meeting the young woman's, then smiled, a faint smile, yet warm enough to make the other feel empowered. "I was just someone who refused to give up my seat to injustice," she replied softly. The young woman nodded, admiration shining in her eyes, before walking away, while Aurora returned to her tea as if the conversation had never happened. The phone on the table buzzed. Aurora glanced at it and simply nodded when she read the notification. 2 major airlines have officially signed a commitment to apply the Aurora Standard worldwide. She didn't open any more emails, nor did she respond to congratulatory messages. For Aurora, those numbers and agreements were no longer as important as what she had proven, that true power does not lie in shouting or forcing others to bow, but in making the entire world change simply by standing up for what is right. Aurora set her cup down and gazed out the window, where the golden light of the setting sun bathed the tall buildings. She exhaled softly, her eyes glowing with rare serenity. She needed no titles, no praise. Her legacy had already been written through changes that millions could touch, see, and live better because of them. And in that quiet moment, Aurora smiled gently to herself, thinking, sometimes it takes just one person sitting down at the right moment for the whole world to stand up. Media experts call this a living testament to the power of composure. You don't need to shout to change the world. You only need to be steadfast enough not to give up your place to injustice. Aurora Hayes did exactly that. And now, millions of others are learning to stand up through this very story. If you believe respect should be the standard, not a privilege, hit like and subscribe to help us spread these inspiring stories. And don't forget to leave a comment with the 3 words, "No giving up." Because that attitude is what changed everything.